In this one, I'll be talking about Qanon, New Age, and Gnosticism, as well as what this white flag thing is, as well as the True North Guardians Alliance and what they're tied to. I'll be talking about the ASMIN, the Alliance of Indigenous Nations, Anne Wolfe, Derek Noonan, Dan Oake, as well as fake chiefs William Denby, and David Grey Eagle. And I'll be talking a little bit about Maggie Braun and how all of these individuals are pushing for the biodigital convergence. So, first of all, there's this Truth Guardians Peace Treaty here, and it says, through the Law of War Manual, we have the ability to seek a truce with the hostile belligerent combatants, in this case the Liberal Crime Syndicate, Privy Council, etc., where we present a peace treaty declaration with terms that include the opportunity for their redemption and subsequently a demand that they pay restitution or reparations for the bioweapons and unlawful mandated measures, if you will. I'm not going to say certain words just to keep this video on YouTube. And while this treaty has been presented, written by members of the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly and of the True North Guardians Alliance, all civilian, non-combatants, and victims of the hostile belligerents are welcome to participate with the treaty process and use it as you see fit. International law has been violated, lives have been lost, and the evidence is irrefutable that this attack is ongoing and premeditated. Our white flag is not a sign of surrender. Per the Law of War Manual, it is a need to negotiate. Per the Law of War Manual, it is a need to save lives and restore livelihoods. Per the Law of War Manual, it is a need to return to the rule of law. Per the Law of War Manual, it is a need to heal the wounded and damaged victims. It is a white flag of truce and a white flag of truth and a white flag of peace per the Law of Peace Manual. The treaty is a mechanism to provide compensation and reparations to the civilian casualties. The treaty serves as a declaration of non-consent and non-participation with the crimes of the hostile belligerents. Under the common law and the international covenants and treaties, it is our lawful duty to stand up to tyranny, preserve human life, and restore peace to all. Warfare has laws and steps that must be followed. The list of the steps from the Law of War Manual are as follows here, and as well, all actions thus far have aligned, synchronized with the proper steps and laws, and the peace treaty is a formal demand for reparations, redress, and restitution, while also seeking an immediate cessation of all hostilities against the civilian non-combatants and victims. Per the Law of War Manual, Section 15, especially 15.6, and per Rome Statute, Article 25, we must declare our neutral status. We are not participating with the hostile belligerents, and we do not consent to the genocidal actions, war crimes, cognitive warfare, international covenant, and treaty violations committed by them in the past and presently. So, here was an event in Ottawa, September 16th. I attended there with Josephine LaValle and James Scott. We'll get to that a little bit later. And, of course, right over here, these are some of the blood thumbprints, if you will. And these blood thumbprints were printed in the Canadian Trucking Magazine, 150th edition. It's ran by a guy named David Mackenzie. And this came around in 2023. And it says, all brothers and sisters from Turtle Island are hereby invited by the authority of the Great Spirit to the sovereign unceded territory of the hereditary Algonquin Nation to peacefully assemble and parley regarding a constitutional confederacy honorable before December 21st, 2023. This invitation is granted under the International Flag of Peace, and it mentions a white square flag being flown. No rectangular corporate flag will be allowed during this peace event. So, this was aired during the time of the Save the Children convoy, and two of the signatures that I know so far are Gordon Berry who is listed as settler indigena, which is Latin for indigenous. And then you have Chief Little Wolverine, whose name is Joseph Nixon, or he also goes by Joseph Frank and Dominic as well, so I'm not sure what his real name is, but the validity of these people being clan mothers and chiefs is definitely in question for sure. And it's a little bit interesting here that underneath Gordon's name, who it says settlers or indigena, he's not native, by the way, but it's interesting that the word indigena is right beside settler because, you know, anybody who is indigenous, for lack of better words, the term indigenous came around in UNDRIP, especially. It is used, United Nations declarations for rights of indigenous people, and so with this particular thing by the UN, what happens is all these land and resource rights are quote unquote are granted to quote unquote indigenous people, right? And it fails to define what indigenous actually means, so puts a lot into question there for sure. So, especially with a lot of these fake indigenous groups that are coming around. So, see in this Truth Guardians peace treaty here, we see different things recommended, like the Law of War Manual. Dr. David Martin, who is heavily invested in the Convergence, James Scott has covered that himself, and I've talked about David Martin in a couple different videos myself. I'll always leave links in the description that I use and links for videos that I make reference to. If I can't fit it in the description, it'll be in a pinned comment. And then, of course, the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly, which is Dan Oake, and Derek Noonan is involved with the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly as well. And then you have this thing, peaceandspace.org, this sort of international tribunal, if you will, which we'll be getting to. And they, of course, promote the NCI and other things of this nature, although with the NCI, it seems like they really didn't want people to speak about the Biodigital Convergence, which has to do with the amalgamation of what is biological and what is digital and blurring those lines. And ultimately, this is what the agenda all comes down to with these dark figures, whether you're talking about the United Nations, whether you're talking about Jesuits, or even the standardization organizations and research councils involved in developing the standards, regulations, and the technology itself for this kind of agenda to come to fruition. So here is someone named Sean Bradley, or Iron Crow is what he's better known as. He's a friend of Gordon Berry's, who we see here, with this Canadian version of a constitutional sheriff's shirt. And what's interesting is that this whole white flag idea, which we'll go into a little bit later as well, but in Brampton on September the 13th, there were people waving white flags as well at this courtroom in Brampton, at this courthouse, excuse me. So, my point here is that this particular individual, Sean Bradley, or Iron Crow, his voice was used, or he was speaking in this leak by Vets for Freedom, where Vets for Freedom were apparently leaking the Save the Children convoy's plan, if you will. Gordon was one of the figurehead faces or leaders of the Save the Children convoy. It's interesting because the plans of that were identical to Marcus Ray's plans in 2022, which involved basically trials in the street for politicians and stuff like that. But the Save the Children convoy had planned to go to different locations from the Department of Defense, Parliament, Privy Council, etc. Kind of funny how they didn't mention Policy Horizons, which is the face of the Biodigital Convergence in Canada. But the point is that this supposed leak of the Save the Children convoy's plans was all just part of a big plan, as a matter of fact, because Marcus Ray's plans consisted of ex-police and ex-military. Vets for Freedom are ex-military. So, there you have it. And so, to move forward now, talking about this guy named Alfred Lambermont Weber. He's a graduate of Yale University and Yale Law School and former Fulbright scholar. He's taught economics at Yale University and constitutional law at the University of Texas. He's former general counsel to the New York City Environmental Protection Administration and former director of the 1977 Carter White House Extraterrestrial Communication Study and former NGO delegate to the United Nations. The author of Exopolitics, Politics, Government, and Law in the Universe. He is the recognized founder of Exopolitics, the science of relations among intelligent civilizations in the multiverse. And then he is described here as a futurist working to create a positive future. So, a futurist is like a modern day industrialist, if you will, which, to kind of put into, point blank terms, a futurist is somebody advocating for the convergence agenda in and of itself. So, and it's better known as transhumanism. So, on Exopolitics, this website, which, from my understanding, is primarily ran through Alfred Weber, this was actually suggested through the Truth Guardians Peace Treaty. And, of course, the Truth Guardians Peace Treaty is part of the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly and True North Guardians Alliance. And they worked alongside this tribunal in and of itself that I'm looking at. So here's the first planetary conference on the rights of indigenous peoples, sovereign indigenous nations, and civil peoples and civil nations. Natural and Common Law Tribunal for Public Health and Justice Act, and it mentions some links here. And of course, the Alliance of Indigenous Nations is promoted, as well as Peoples of the Salmon, which is one of the fake indigenous nations that are part of the Alliance of Indigenous Nations. So, here we have a video here as well, which we'll be looking at. But first, I just want to go over the supposed Grand Chief, if you will, of the ASMIN. The ASMIN, which stands for Anishinaabe, Salutri, and Métis Indigenous Nation. What happens is Zane Bell, or Chief Wabisca Mukwa, whatever you want to call him, he retired from the ASMIN, I believe, as of April 2024. And there is somebody else that has taken over the role of chief in this fake nation, if you will, named Arthur Jefford. I'll be looking at him in a later video. So, to look at Wabisca, it says he's the hereditary chief of ASMIN, and he is working in resource and land management for the nation and for international sustainable development. Already doesn't sound good. Formerly, he was acting senior scientific advisor for the Federal Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development in the Ontario region until retirement in 2004. He's worked for all levels of government, from Environment Canada, HQ, and Ontario Region, Ontario Ministry of the Environment, Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, and as an environmental technologist for the town of Lindsay, Ontario in the early years. And upon following the grandfather's instructions, the chief followed an educational path through both native and colonial education to learn the ways of contemporary society, entering and working with the 3 tiers of government to protect the Earth Mother. He has diplomas in forestry, fish and wildlife, and a bachelor's of science in biology from Trent University, and he follows traditional medicine, harvesting, and cultural activities. Currently involved in the leadership role of many nations' domestic and international developments in resource management, from harvesting to industrial utilization in the energy sector, sustainable housing, food production, finance, education, and health services. He's the traditional indigenous Métis, advancing his nation's sovereignty issues as being the oldest Métis nation that is unsurrendered and untreated in Canada. Not true. Definitely not the oldest Métis nation for sure. And it's not even really a Métis nation if you think about it. It's just a fake nation on board with the United Nations declarations for rights of indigenous peoples. And he's also furthering the convergence agenda with all this resume revolving around the environment and resources, which true natives would actually call relatives, if you will. He is essentially contributing to what is called the circular economy, which is a term used kind of like reduce, reuse, recycle. But essentially, it doesn't matter for one thing when you put something in the recycling bin or the garbage bin or the compost or whatever. It all ends up in the same place anyway. And so what happens with a lot of the waste and with a lot of resources is they're sort of compacted together, and through a process called flash graphene, basically the resources are put together and creates graphene in many forms, and there are many processes and variations for graphene or graphene oxide and so on and so forth that are created, and it's used in smart related infrastructure, and also is used specifically for twinning the environment into the metaverse. So twinning was actually developed by NASA, but when you twin something and when you basically take something that's organic or not organic, whether going from people to animals, plants, and buildings and stuff like that, they're all twinned into the metaverse in order to have a blurred line between what's biological and what's digital. And so when people talk about climate change, which we will see that Wabiska or Zane or whatever his name is, went to a climate change conference in Bolivia in 2009, and he actually met Hugo Chavez there, and other leaders in South America at the time as well. And so what happens is when people refer to this term climate change, they're actually talking about changing the physical environment into a digital environment or blurring those lines. So anyway, it says here he's the 9th grandson of this person and Jean Nicolette, and the interpreter for the Company of 100 in Champlain, who was adopted as war chief to the Algonquin Nation, Anishinaabeg. And as well, he was the chief negotiator, comprehensive claim for the ASMIN Nation before the UN and the Queen, if you say so. And so he was the Métis representative on the binational Great Lakes 5-year water quality review, sitting on 3 working groups reporting to governments of Canada and the US. So this guy has dealt with environmental assessments and contamination sites and wastewater and such like that. So essentially as well, he's messing with the water supply. Like, this guy is no good in any way you want to slice this, any way you want to look at it, right? And so you have different things in the water, from silver, silica, nanoparticles toward graphene for twinning literally the water into the environment, and into the virtual environment like the metaverse and that sort of a thing. So yeah, we can see all around that this guy's resume just revolves around destroying the environment, not preserving it, and actually goes far as to say digitalizing it. And Chief Arthur Jefford, who I showed a picture of, who's the present chief of the ASMIN now, he actually has a very similar background, but we'll be looking at him in a further video, because this one already has a lot of depth in and of itself. So, Ministry of the Environment and Energy, provincial officer, Ministry of Environment, doing other things here as well. working for Environment Canada as a physical scientist. And so, yeah, like, I'll make sure to leave the links in the description so that people can have a more in-depth outlook of this guy's resume here. But working in an engineering department, this guy as well would have had to have interacted with the standardization organizations involved in the Biodigital Convergence in order to actually do his job, from what I'm reading here, because every engineer works with the standardization organizations, and if he's working with different equipment and doing different things revolving around landfills and sewage treatment plants and, you know, the environment as a whole, fisheries, waste management, this guy would have had to have been heavily in bed with the standardization organizations such as the International Standardization Organization, International Electrotechnical Commission, the IEEE, and as well probably the Standardization Council of Canada. And all nations have these standardization organizations, if you will, because all countries in the world are on board this same agenda. So now to read a little bit about this court document, if you will. So it says here, Chief Clan Mother Ikwe Machine. I've never heard of somebody referred to as Chief Clan Mother before. Correct me if I'm wrong, if that's even a thing. And then also you have basically the way that ASMIN essentially works is that this fake Métis Anishinaabe Nation or whatever, you purchase a quote-unquote indigenous certificate for, it's $75 presently, and it's a $75 yearly subscription, and you're told you get ownership of your land resources and a wealth system where you register your private and intellectual property in a private vault known as Tumult Trust Fund, which is basically a blockchain-based trust fund. So the blockchain is the backbone of the convergence agenda in and of itself. So I'll leave other links in the description that I'm not showing in front of me because I've used them in several videos and I don't want to flood this with tabs, but there's a woman named Melanie Swan who works for the Blockchain Institute, and she has an article called The Transhuman Crypto Cloud Mine, so I'm just going to quote from it. The crypto cloud mine vision is that cloud mines might not constitute not only an application but a next generation platform for the realization of transhuman futures. Cloud mines could be architected as a blockchain system in which each network node is a mind, human or otherwise. So basically what this is saying is that all blockchain products or whatever, what I'm saying is one person who creates a blockchain versus somebody else who creates a blockchain, they're going to market it as private or decentralized, but the reality is that they are both co-linked, and the way that this is worded here is that through nodes, which are devices used for the blockchain, like referring to a computer or your phone or something. In this context of the Transhuman Crypto Cloud Mines article, a node can be not only a machine but also a human being. So if human beings can interact very easily, whether through a phone or even talking in person or whatever, so can different blockchains. So there you have it. Nothing is ever really private. Go figure. And I'll also leave a link to show that Bitcoin was created by the NSA. So people like Edward Snowden that tell you to use Bitcoin to combat central bank digital currencies, people like that are just controlled opposition, right? Just another fake voice for the people. And then I'll leave a link as well for from the National Research Council of Canada, which has ledger-based technologies, which is what blockchain is, classified as quote-unquote sensitive technology research areas. Now to move on talking about this here, this ICWE machine, if you will, it is described on the ASMIN of the Boreal Forest website as the matriarchal tribal inherited leader of the Anishinaabe, Solutrean, Métis Indigenous Nation. So I have yet to do research on this person named ICWE Machine, whose real name is actually Yvonne Fulton. I'll just show a picture so that there can be better reference right here. This is Yvonne Fulton over here, or ICWE Machine, whatever. And then you have Zane Bell over here. So this particular individual, what I had read about her being a matriarchal tribal inherited leader, is on the ASMIN of the Boreal Forest website. There is also asminofturtleisland.org and asminofturtleisland.com. So there's 3 different websites, and as well, we're going to dive into a live stream that Jason LaFaci did near the end of this video, but he mentions 2 different ASMIN groups, so I still have some research to do in this area as things are not totally clear. And then as well, CERD, C-E-R-D, Command to the UN Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So what this actually is, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination is a UN convention, a third-generation human rights instrument. The convention commits its members to the elimination of racial discrimination and the promotion of understanding among all races. The convention also requires its parties to criminalize hate speech and criminalize membership in racist organizations. The convention also includes an individual complaints mechanism, effectively making it enforceable against its parties. This has led to the development of limited jurisprudence on the interpretation and implementation of the convention, and the convention was adopted and opened for signature by the UN General Assembly on December 21st, 1965, and entered into force on January 4th, 1969. As of July 2020, it has 88 countries as signatories and 182 countries as parties, including accessions and successions, and the convention is monitored by the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So, as well, here I just want to share that the incorporation date for the ASMIN, if you will, and I'm not sure which one, is in Manitowoc, Canada, and it was, you have Zane Bell as the director, and it was implemented in 2015. They claim it was dissolved in 2018, but the group is still active today. And then, of course, as well here, you have its location here. It says Sundridge, and this claims it was incorporated in 2004, and as well, it is apparently connected to something called Kinniqui Nation, which is part of the Alliance of Indigenous Nations, and it is apparently a founding member of the Alliance of Indigenous Nations. David Grey Eagle, who we'll be talking about later, Special Envoy for Grand Chief Obisco Mukwa, showed up at a City of Pickering Council meeting, falsely claiming to represent the Métis Nation of Ontario. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot in question there about the actual incorporation of the ASMIN, and also which ASMIN group I'm actually speaking about, because there's apparently 2, but I know of 3 different websites. So anyway, sorry for the confusion, gonna move forward. So this this particular paper here, if you will, indicates that there was a memorandum that was sent to the UN by the ASMIN, and this right here, what we're looking at, is the CERD committee, if you will, writing to the ASMIN. So it says, greetings to the chair of CERD. We write to command a historic step in international law, the removal of the de facto government in Canada from the UN and the recognition of the de jure government of Canada, led by the Alliance of ASMIN, Peoples of the Salmon, and other hereditary clan mothers, chiefs, headmen, and headwomen. So this is interesting because it's not really all that specific, and also yeah, so besides ASMIN and Peoples of the Salmon, it's unclear as to what they're referring to, and this is from 2021, and I'm not sure when the Alliance of Indigenous Nations itself was created, but if it was created afterward, then that's why that term is not used in this. So it says the Dominion or colony called Canada ceased to exist in law after the passing of the Statute of Westminster in 1931, which ended the legal jurisdiction of the Governor-General in Ottawa, which capital city was confirmed by the Superior Court in Ottawa to be on our unceded land. Per Indigenous common law below, the Dominion of Canada had never had lawful jurisdiction since the Statute of Westminster was passed only in London. Today, the website of the Governor-General of Canada confirms that the Governor-General now only has de facto power, not de jure power, that belongs to the unconquered, unsurrendered, hereditary Indigenous nations. And it confirmed in Haida versus BC that the Crown is only in de facto control of the resources of Canada that belong to the women and men who are Indigenous to this land. And then it mentions international constitutional common law, aka Indigenous common law. I am not really sure what that is, or if that's even a legitimate thing. So basically, what happens here is, so far from what I understand, the goal is to have the de facto government of Canada removed from the UN and to have the de jure government of Canada, as they say, take control of what we call Canada, I guess, or to replace the governing structure. And so, being that these groups utilize the blockchain, not only in the Tumult Trust Fund, but also for something called the Love Phone, if you will, which I've gone over in a couple of videos. Anne Wolfe is a member of the ASMIN, and as well, she puts out something called Evolve Blockchain, which I've talked about in different videos, and it's basically a direct democracy system where memorandums and voting and stuff like that would occur on this piece of blockchain technology. So, all in all, people like that are, well, for lack of better words, they're the worst, because in a problem, reaction, solution type of scenario, people like Anne Wolfe are the ones providing the artificial solution when there are already problems put into place, such as by the Government of Canada, the UN, and other things like this. We react to this problem, and then the artificial solution gets brought through, generally by controlled opposition like that. So then, basically as well, it says that on April 23rd, 2021, the Supreme Court of Canada confirmed that prior to the Canada Act of 1982, our Aboriginal rights were recognized under the international law known as British Imperial Policy. And then it says here, accordingly, our de jure lawful authority over the land known as Canada on Turtle Island, North and South America, and the Caribbean were presumed to continue. The British imperial policy was clearly stated by Brian Donovan, clerk to Chief Justice Lamer, during the historic case, the Wet'suwet'en versus BC, which case recognized the sovereignty of the Wet'suwet'en land in British Columbia. It is noted that Brian earned his Master of Law at Harvard University and his Doctorate of Philosophy at Oxford University. And in his 2003 article, Common Law, Origins of Aboriginal Settlements to Land, the common law doctrine of England was set forth by Lord Mansfield in Campbell versus Hall. And And then, of course, it says that a country conquered by British arms becomes a dominion of the king in right of his crown, and therefore necessarily subject to the legislature, the Parliament of Great Britain. The Supreme Court of Canada has twice clearly stated that the Indigenous peoples of Canada, erroneously retitled Canada, were never conquered in Haida, BC, in Haida versus BC, and Regina versus DeSoto. And so neither ASMIN nor peoples of the Salmon have been conquered, nor do they consent. Instead, these unsurrendered nations seek the removal of the unlawful de facto government of Canada from the unceded lands of Ottawa and from all of Turtle Island and from the United Nations. Well, the United Nations, which is a Rockefeller organization, its headquarters in New York at Rockefeller Plaza, is not a legitimate organization, but you can't replace something that is illegitimate or de facto, in this particular case, you can't replace that with something else that is illegitimate. It's all part of the whole problem, reaction, solution scenario here. It's well noted that the Canada Act of 1982 was passed only in London, England, which act is not valid of the Indigenous sovereign government of Canada. And the BNA Act of 1867, renamed the Constitution Act of 1982 by the de facto Canada Corporation, did not receive the royal assent of Queen Victoria and was repealed in 1893. It's well noted that peoples of the Salmon never signed the Oregon Treaty of 1846, by which Queen Victoria, as Queen of Canada, simply stole British Columbia, further grounds for expulsion from the United Nations. And it mentions Ottawa being on unceded land. And so the point that I'm getting at here is that Canada is a corporation, and it's actually registered in Washington, D.C. at the Canadian Embassy through the U.S. Treasuries and Trades Commission. I can even leave a link for that if people so desire. And then also the passing of this Constitution Act, which was the BNA Act in 1867, was passed in London, England. It was passed by foreign monarchs, if you will, and there isn't really any legitimacy to it at all. So, all in all, something illegitimate stole the land that, we call Canada to this day, this corporation, and then another set of thieves, which are the ASMIN, if you will, or the whole Alliance of Indigenous Nations, want to have this governing structure, which isn't even legitimate, to be replaced by something else that is illegitimate, that is far worse, actually, that would have to do with the biodigital convergence in and of itself. Even though the blockchain is not directly mentioned in this thing at all, in this report at all, the fact of the matter is that these fake native nations do support that, which the Alliance of Indigenous Nations actually support something called Nasara Jasara, if you will, right? And so Nasara Jasara is like a return to a gold standard, if you will, which is actually just a gold NFT, which is like a picture on the blockchain, if you will. And ultimately, in order to have digital wallets on the blockchain, right, what they would like to do is they would like to have an NFT wallet that is essentially CRISPR DNA, CRISPR being DNA altering technology, and the DNA strand being the wallet. Combine this with something called a token-based economy or task-based economy, which I can also leave links for. What happens is you have limited and temporary tasks available that people would be competing for in order to have tokens loaded onto their CRISPR DNA NFT strand on the blockchain. So this is the kind of future in which we're heading, and people like Anne Wolfe will say, what does the blockchain, what does evolved blockchain have to do with biology? It has nothing to do with it. Wrong. Because of the transhuman crypto cloud mines where all blockchains are interconnected. So there you have it. Now, this particular video here, which in the future will North America, Turtle Island, US, Canada break up into regions. You have different people in it. You have Papoise, who's taking a nap at the correct time. His name is actually David Quinn. And then you have Sherry LePage, John Cipolla, and Glenn Bogue. So, in order to talk about them individually, for one thing, this video is about quote-unquote Turtle Island, so North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean, breaking apart into different regions. So I'm not going to go over the content in that video because it's largely irrelevant to what we're actually talking about here, but the particular individuals. So Glenn Bogue, who goes by the name Spirit Warrior, was an Olympian for Canada and a scholar who wrote a 5-book series with a master's in history, and a lawyer, quote unquote, much embattled by the Law Society of Ontario, who are just digging their heels in against the Indigenous people. Then you have David Quinn, aka Papoise, who's an appointed headsman of the peoples of the Salmon due to knowledge that he has in the courts. And then you have Sherry LePage over here, who describes herself as a Hassa and a healer, and works in the quote-unquote breath of life work with people in biodynamic cranial psychotherapy. She says, my background is being out in the field with people that I was speaking with Spirit Warrior a bit about is the 5th dimension, or the 5D, if you will. We're going to talk a little bit about that New Age kind of theme there a little bit further in the video. And then you have John Cipolla, which is Zesasapi Mukwa of the Alliance of Indigenous Nations. He's the leader and coordinator of the Alliance of Indigenous Nations over here, and he has a law degree from Thomas Cooley Law School in Michigan, and worked for a national real estate and development company up until 2003. He apparently then started learning about the quote-unquote healing arts and was a New York State Justice of the Peace for 4 years. In 2017, he ran for Hawaii's first congressional seat, and he believed he could run as an independent and he could win because of the quote-unquote consciousness of the island. He claims his name was suppressed from the media and he was running against a billionaire who owned hotels in a certain part of Hawaii. In 2021, he got adopted by the Grand Chief Wabisca Mukwa, who he says is just retired, like I had said. And he says Wabisca has been fighting this thing in all branches of government. And he says he lives in Midland, Ontario, and he makes mention of the eagle and condor prophecy and says, when the eagle in the north soars with the condor in the south, the people of the 4 directions will come together and co-create this new earth, if you will. And then you don't see a picture of Alfred Weber, unfortunately, in the video, but there's a picture of him right there. And he mentions that in 1977, when he first joined the Futures Unit, the Senate for the Study of Social Policy at Stanford Research Institute, they had a contract with the CIA to study alternative 50-year futures of the United States of America. And Willis Harman, the director, pulled him aside and said that in the future the USA will be breaking up into regions, and Alfred assumed he wasn't given a final copy of the report, that this is what the SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, may have reported to the CIA. And then Alfred mentions that they'll be studying Glenn's Part 3, Indigenous Sovereign Nations in the future. Will North America, Turtle Island, break up into regions? And Alfred was raised in Cuba, and that's where he gets his Tainake heritage. I apologize if I mispronounced that. And he claims this is where Columbus first landed, and that the village was massacred by Spanish and the Christians. So now to move forward in talking about the True North Guardians Alliance, I'm just gonna drink some water here first, and we can see its logo very much reminisces the Space Force logo or the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek. So it says, moving down, it says, we will stand strong using lawful, peaceful, and effective action to end the tyranny of those who are actively attempting to take away our rights and freedoms. We will hold them accountable for their actions using truth and facts with the help of the International Tribunal. We will act in service to others while rising up to defend ourselves and our families. The only way out of this slavery is to exit. So the International Tribunal, they are referring to Alfred Weber and his thing, which is where I pulled the video from. And of course, this, just for a little bit of a refresher here, that is the International Tribunal there that I am referring to. And the True North Guardians Alliance is ran by someone named Dan Oake, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. But just to zone in on, we will hold them accountable. Accountable or accountability or holding one to account. These are just various words or derivatives of the word accountable that are used by people in the freedom movement repetitively. And this sort of recurring theme, I can't help but feel, is a form of brainwashing and social engineering. So UCC and common law and natural law are promoted as well as Zoom meetings with Sensei. He's referring to Sensei Wallace Platt of the Hanbu Dojo in CMAC, which is basically like CMAC is an organization, Classical Martial Arts Center, Fudo Shin Dojo. So Fudo Shin Dojo is Dan Oake's dojo, and Sensei Wallace Hanshi Platt is the guy who runs the Hanbu Dojo, which is like the head dojo. So if you look at the CMAC like a corporation, if you will, or an organization with all, like an umbrella with various dojos, the Hanbu Dojo means the head dojo, and Fudo Shin Dojo is the one that Dan Oake runs in particular. So just gonna look at the website very briefly. Classical Martial Arts Canada was founded by Hanshi Wallace Platt in Burlington, Ontario in 1983, and this dojo has been an affiliate of CMAC since 2015. So just to show you just some images here, that is Dan Oake over there, and then we have Wallace Platt over here, which is the sensei of this sensei right here. So to move forward, the evidence thus far. So essentially here it makes reference of detox remedies that are linked in these links here, and of course as well exopolitics, which is the Alfred Weber website, is listed there as well. So in this particular link over here, which I'm pulling up, some of the treatment for people that have taken the experimental inoculation revolving around the illness that was never isolated. These are treatments that are recommended for people to quote-unquote detox, if you will. But once again, going back to the whole problem, reaction, solution idea, is that an artificial solution is always put into place. So these different things are made up of different heavy metals or other things that don't really actually detox as they market them to. They are composed or comprised of different nanotechnologies, and I've already spoken about this over here and this one over here, ivermectin and nattokinase, but I am going to talk about methylene blue just a little bit here. So methylene blue in and of itself, what happens is, it says in this paper, we study the interaction of a small dye molecule, namely methylene blue, with graphene surfaces using surface plasmon resonance. We show that by utilizing all the parameters of the SPR angular diff and exploiting the fact that methylene blue absorbs light at the operating wavelength, it is possible to detect the binding of small molecules that would otherwise not give a significant signal. The binding of MB to unmodified graphene is found to be stronger than that for gold. By studying the interaction at modified surfaces, we demonstrate that electrostatic effects play a dominant role in the binding of methylene blue onto graphene. Furthermore, following the binding kinetics at various concentrations allow us to estimate apparent equilibrium binding and rate constants for the interaction of methylene blue with graphene. So basically what it's saying is that methylene blue binds with graphene a lot in a much stronger manner than it does with gold. So, and when it comes down to graphene, we're actually pretty much ingesting this on a daily basis, whether it be through certain elements of a food supply or even like, what people call chemtrails, for lack of better words, they spray nanographene particles, like I said, for the purpose of twinning the environment, and this all has to do with the circular economy, like I said. So graphene is attracted to methylene blue, is my point. So all this is doing is essentially reeling in more graphene for people by taking in the methylene blue. And I'm sure that there's even more to it as well. So this is how nutraceuticals work in and of itself. And the term nutraceutical, just to break that down, nutrition and pharmaceutical. And those two things don't even go together when you think about it, because pharmacy comes from pharmakia, which means maker of poisons or maker of drugs. So this right here on the True North Guardians Alliance website are spiritual command suggestions. And so concepts of light and spirit, different mantras and stuff like that are suggested, and as well it mentions angels, ascended masters, and that kind of a thing. So when you read different books in the occult, such as the Key of Solomon, for instance, which has many different books in and of itself, the Goetia and others, when it refers to angels or archangels, it's the same thing as saying demons. These terms are used interchangeably when talking about the occult. And then ascended masters is a term that somebody named Helena Blavatsky and also Alice Bailey used quite prominently. And Helena Blavatsky is like the teacher or the person who Alice Bailey was largely influenced by. And Alice Bailey's husband, Foster Bailey, who was a Freemason, they both formed the Lucifer Publishing Company, which was eventually renamed the Lucis Trust, and it's part of the United Nations, which I'll be looking at very briefly. And then as well, it mentions Metatron here as well. Metatron is basically in certain Islamic folklore is looked at as a angelic scribe to Allah, and as well in certain pieces of Christian, if you will, Christian mythology or Christian lore, Metatron is a spirit that basically possessed Enoch, which is the grandfather, great-grandfather of Noah, as in Noah's Ark, and Metatron is also interpreted as, like, for lack of better words, an ascended form of Enoch. So, and then when it talks about light here, well, light and darkness are really kind of like interchangeably one and the same, because when you're submerged in darkness, you can't see, but when there's piercing, blinding light, you also can't see. So either way, you're blind, right? So anyway, just to go over the Lucis Trust a little bit here, and I'm going to relate these spiritual and metaphysical concepts to the convergence in a moment, but The Lucis Trust has consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and World Goodwill is recognized by the Department of Global Communications at the United Nations as a non-governmental organization. As such, the Trust and World Goodwill are part of a community of many hundreds of NGOs that play an active role in the UN, particularly in spreading information about the UN and fostering support for UN programs. And since their inception, Lucis Trust and World Goodwill have given their support through meditation, educational materials, and seminars by highlighting the importance of the UN's goals and activities as they represent the voice of the peoples and nations of the world. So that's sort of like a New Age look at things, and now we're going to talk a little bit about Gnosticism, and we're going to go to talk about Gnosticism later when I talk about Saturn, and you'll see why later. So Barbara Hubbard, if you will, who's this elderly woman that has since passed away, was part of the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, although her organization is backed by the Rockefeller family, which also, like I said, Rockefeller Plaza is where the UN headquarters sits, or its main headquarters. Hubbard's vision of trans-evolution through a super-organic cyber nervous system was inspired by the Gnostic prophecies of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and the design science revolution of R. Buckminster Fuller. Teilhard de Chardin was a eugenicist Jesuit priest who preached a trans-Gnostic gospel of spiritual or noetic evolution through the awakening of universal consciousness through the noosphere, if you will. You see a diagram of like the globe, for instance. You see the biosphere, the magnetosphere, all these things. The noosphere is the most, outer level of that diagram, if you will. So Fuller was an eminent futurist. There you go. Someone who supports the biodigital convergence and the godfather of the design science revolution, which prototyped synergetic models of evolutionary architecture such as the geodesic dome. Both Teilhard de Chardin and Fuller professed their faith in the cosmic Christ consciousness of noosphere evolution, which Hubbard likewise idolized as the crux of humankind's cybernetic evolution into a trans-technological collective. So, evolving into the noosphere or ascending like an ascended master or whatever term you want to use, these are all just kind of terms for reaching a quote-unquote cybernetic evolution, if you will. So that's where this occultic stuff really goes. And the word occult just means hidden in and of itself, but the way a lot of these philosophies and stuff like that and occultic teachings and principles are used are for the very purpose of putting out the biodigital convergence or a transhuman agenda, if you will, putting it in different terms. During Hubbard's 2015 speech to members of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, she traced the awakening of her own conscious evolution to her reading of Teilhard de Chardin's Phenomenon of Man. The minute I read that, I dedicated myself to the noosphere. Derived from the pre-Socratic philosopher Anaxagoras' concept of the nous, which is the omnipresent mind of the cosmos, the noosphere is, according to Teilhard de Chardin, the tangential energy of the universe that is evolving through human consciousness. In Hubbard's speech at the 2015 IONS International Conference, she pontificated how, through the tangential energies of noetic evolution, the planet has grown a new nervous system in the last 15 years. And its internet, its Facebook, its Twitter, its 7 billion cell phones and counting. An enormous nervous system has been given, and it's open to us. So, in brief, Hubbard believed that the noospheric expansion of consciousness is evolving the human biological nervous system into an extended technological network of smartphones that are interlinked with internet social media by ostensibly branching human nervous systems collectively out through mobile phones, across satellite telecommunications, online social networks are, according to Hubbard, building evolutionary stepping stones toward a transhuman zenith in which brain-computer interfaces and nanotech implants will unite human consciousness with the cosmic consciousness of the noosphere by merging organic biological intelligence with high-tech artificial intelligence. This is not a future I want any sort of part of. So, mentions different resources on the True North Guardians Alliance, if you will, namely this First Republic Registrar, if you will. There's the Common Law Courts, the real King of England, whoever that is. And then you have the Myth is Canada, which is ran by a guy named Doug Force, if you will. Mentioned him briefly in other videos. And as well, he's also connected to William Denby, Bill Denby, and We the People Press as well. And then you have the FLCC Alliance and the COVID Care Alliance as well. So, World Doctors Alliance, all these people that promote the fake detox remedies, if you will, that are really biodigital convergence doctors. And then you also have this sort of common law, natural law sort of deal as well with people like Doug Force of the Myth is Canada, this common law court, and then you have the First Republic Registrar as well. So we're going to dive into the First Republic Registrar a little bit, being that it is a resource on True North Guardians Alliance website, if you will. So it says here, once this loads, you will see anyway, it says that the FRRF is a sovereign intergovernmental organization with Eagle Eye Ministries and a private records archive in accordance with natural and international common law. And it says as well, to clarify our slogan of working with and not against, which comes from Sir Dr. Lord Grantham Taylor Hughes of the Bauer Foundation. We'll be getting to that in a sec, but the suspense is killing me. So, Bauer is the original last name for the Rothschild family. So that's who that is. So with this slogan, it simply means that they're apparently working peacefully with all good sovereign governments and people worldwide. There's no such thing as good government and there's also no such thing as sovereignty within government either, because to govern is to manipulate or control in and of itself. So it's not the same thing as a leader. We take the simple stance of working with everyone for progress, albeit we are all aware of unconscionable financial greed. Here at FRRF, we are not typing to identify the culprits. Instead, we focus attention on our inherent birthright to sovereignty and the phenomenal progress that collectively we can all achieve. We work in partnership with Sovereign International Court of Justice and the Sovereign International Criminal Court with the following seal signed when FRRF was enacted as their official registrar, if you will. So, it's currently working in partnership with several solidarities, meaning people who've come together in groups to focus on various missions that aim to become beacons of hope in a time of change and transformation. We're also working toward establishing golden age communities with all the amenities and necessities required for fully functioning independent states. It's now well on its way to attaining worldwide recognition as an international presence and advocate for private and peaceful sovereign jurisdictions with a focus on infrastructure for including but not limited to homes, farms, industrial factories, hotels, health, resorts, schools, hospitals, etc. And partners also adopt the slogan of working with and not against. Yeah, if you say so. So here's the thing, right, is this organization is promoting what they call sovereignty, if you will. However, the fact of the matter is that they are really just messing with the Sestua KV Trust, if you will, the CQV. The Sestua KV Trust is what your birth certificate, your driver's license is attached to, and so essentially as well, they're basically working with the blockchain as well, as we'll get to, and they have some pretty interesting partners and work with various quote-unquote indigenous nations. I use that term, of course, because while they don't actually advocate for UNDRIP on the website that I have seen, the fact of the matter is that they market these things like the Talismanic Kingdom of Atmarium as an indigenous community, along with this fake Cherokee nation over here, the dynastic order of Saint Miriam, which is creating apparently a new heaven and a new earth. I've heard New Earth used by John Sapola earlier when talking about the Eagle and Condor prophecy, and I've also heard that term used by Sasha Stone quite frequently. Then you've got the United Kingdom of Atlantis worldwide, and there are various other communities as well, such as Asgardia, the Space Nation. So, anyway, yeah, the point that I'm getting at is they're all, the reason why they call themselves indigenous when you break it down, even though UNDRIP is not actually shown on this website from what I've seen anyway, UNDRIP allots all these land and resource rights to quote-unquote indigenous people, but does not define what indigenous actually means. So, whatever way you slice it, you know, Dan, or the True North Guardians Alliance, if you will, he's just the face of it, is promoting these organizations and perhaps even working with them, and we know full well that he is working with that international tribune ran through Alfred Weber, the futurist. So, all in all, Dan is pushing for transhumanism, whether he is aware of it or not. So, and there are other things as well he is working toward, which we'll get to further. So, this document basically mentions like sovereign birth, like the birthright and stuff like that, and essentially as well talks about like the fidelity ceremony. You guys can read this yourself if you want, but it sounds very much like they're trying to alter the Sisterhood KV trust, if you will, or as well alter the birth certificate, if you will. And I don't know where the actual copy of the Sisterhood KV trust sits, if it sits in a Vatican vault somewhere, or however that works, if I'm real with you. But what I'm saying is that they're trying to streamline to a new system, if you will. They're also pushing for the convergence as well, and I'm sure Lord Grantham Taylor is doing that as well as part of the Bauer Foundation. So the Bauer Foundation I've not been able to find information on as of yet, but Bauer is Rothschild is what that is. So Lord Grantham Taylor Hughes, this is who we have here. PhD, member of Prussian von Bauer Rothschild banking family as one Baron von Bauer Rothschild. As a foundation family trust lawyer, what do you know? He retired a number of years ago to public reveal that an international bankruptcy solution has been discovered in 2004. Is that an artificial solution in the problem reaction solution scenario? I wouldn't trust a Rothschild. That fix has been recorded on many of Grantham's previous shows, explaining that the present debt and money situation could be certified by public mandate through paper certification. Further detailed explanation is why the shows has been presented in the last several years, and please avail yourselves of the archives, over 400 shows, many topics pertinent to the bankruptcy and others for humanitarian reasons regarding financial independency are also discussed with his co-host journalist, Gabriella Foster. Their light interaction with good humor gives the show a lively, fun atmosphere to sometimes serious matters simplified by the host. Besides well-versed in uniform commercial code law discussing the politic, Grantham has gained spiritual self-realization in India in 1972. that reveals why he is so pertinent regarding even the political topics, with him having a more spiritual show on Saturday night's Blog Talk Radio show at the same time. So then as well, in this special notice here, it mentions various names in here, which I'll have to dive into in a later video, such as Lord Windsor. If that's part of the Windsor family, if you will, like the English royal family, they're actually German, not English. And Gotha Saxe-Coburg, or Gotha Coburg-Saxe, I can't remember the arrangement of those like three names, if you will, but that's where the Windsor family actually comes from, and they renamed themselves Windsor at the time of World War II. So, you have someone from Malaysia, and so on and so forth, and it mentions the Saturn government, Saturn Parliament, Saturn Imperial Sovereign Royal Family, NATO, High Command Crown Jewel Company, the British Virgin Islands, U.S. Treasury Board, and European Parliament, European Central Bank. And it says that this is an international platform for all quote-unquote good government, solidarity groups, organizations, and sovereign people to file and record good allodial titles. So basically, so you actually own the land is what they're saying, but not what they actually mean. And sovereignty certification. All allodial titles and sovereignty certification documents and contracts are issued by the exchanger grantor of the First Republic Registrar Foundation, the common law pure trust, in accordance with Universal Commercial Code and common law Principia. So basically here you see, you know, Sir Paul Anthony Symonds at the bottom, and then you have Lord Grantham Taylor, who we already went over. So we're going to go over this guy, Paul Anthony Symonds, and we'll go over some of the other names in a later video. However, I just want to talk about this Saturn concept for a second. The word Saturn, like, Saturn is a Roman god, and in the Greek mythology, he's known as Kronos. And to the Gnostic people, if you will, as we were going over that Barbara Hubbard article there, Saturn or Kronos is known as the Demiurge, right? And the Demiurge can be a being of order, it can be an order of destruction, or the two can go hand in hand, kind of like the Masonic phrase Ordo ab Chao, or order of chaos. So the point that I'm making here is that Saturn or Kronos, or whatever you want to call this entity, or egregore, or whatever, is also illustrated through the shade black, illustrated through a square or a cube, right? Masons stand on a checkerboard floor that's black and white, so you have Saturn worship in a Masonic lodge, for instance, whether someone's aware of it or not, doesn't matter, they all wear the stupid blindfolds anyway. And then, as well, Metatron, like I was mentioning earlier, is illustrated through a cube or the shade black. So there you have it as well. So Metatron can also be the same entity, if you will, or have characteristics that are similar. So here is this Paul Anthony Symonds, or Symonds, that we were looking at. And these are some general provisions for this passport, or this card, if you will, that is issued. And so there's apparently no restriction to travel, as they say, do not detain, do not interrogate, do not arrest. But when have the color of law authorities, if you will, such as, and I use the term authorities loosely, such as police, for instance, which is one letter short of policy, when have they ever worked for the people, right? So I wouldn't count on these passes actually stopping police from, say, arresting you or detaining you. And as well, you have, it says, like, personal attributes of this guy. He was ordained sovereign by birthright, an Aboriginal Indigenous international citizen, born in Jamaica, domiciled on the land of England, and he's a pro-notary, author, writer, scribe, public speaker, philanthropist, and humanitarian projects coordinator. Sounds vague, but also sinister. And he's known as Lord Sir Paul Anthony Simons, and he's spiritually known as Nebu Kamat, the golden ray of justice, liberation, and balance. And he's also part of this talismanic kingdom of At-Mariam, if you will, which is one of the quote-unquote indigenous nations recognized by the First Republic Registrar Foundation. And as well, he's the controller of the central bank of that fictional nation, if you will. And as well, you know, part of the kingdom of Saint Penn nation state. That's funny because when someone gets thrown into the pen, it's like someone getting thrown in a prison, so it's an interesting name right there. And then he has been a UN officer of diplomacy agent status and inspector of human rights, the Organization of Human Rights Defense. The United Nations is for anything but human rights, for the dynastic order of Saint Mariam as well, one of the other fictional nations, if you will, and United Republic of Sovereign Nations, and as well, he's the head knight in the order of Knight Kadosh. So we're gonna go over what Knight Kadosh is very briefly. It's actually the 30th degree of Freemasonry out of 33. We're talking about Scottish Rite Freemasonry, not York Rite. And so the Knights Kadosh works in it's kind of got like threefold, if you will, 3 degrees. So 30th degree is Knight Kadosh, Inquisitor Commander is 31, and then 32nd degree is Prince of the Royal Secret. And all 3 of those degrees are apparently connected. And as well, it mentions that the 4 words of the Magi, which is where the word magic comes from, the Magi come from the area of like Persia, basically, which would today be known as Iran. To know, to dare, to will, to be silent are written in 4 symbolic forms of the Sphinx. It's interesting that they choose the number 4 right there because of the squares, and we know that squares represent basically worship of the demiurge or Saturn, Kronos, whatever egregore or name you really want to give it, doesn't matter. The confluence of these degrees brings us to the completion of the 3rd temple, and the royal secret is solved as to whether we have made this world a temple fit for the abiding place of the grand architect of the universe. Grand architect of the universe is how Freemasons refer to God, or their creator figure, if you will. So I'll leave this link in the description, and people can take a look at the specifications of what this degree would entail, and you know, the time in the quote-unquote chamber or cave of reflection, if you will, where typically one sits in darkness and they're surrounded by different symbols and stuff like that, and it'll probably vary depending on the Masonic degree. And then, of course, this mysterious ladder, if you will, is part of the degree, if you will. So yeah, this is the full degree right here, and people can read on it themselves if they so desire. And so this, if you will, this United Digital Currency Reserve Foundation, an entity set up by the United Humanitarian Trust, is in conjunction with the Digital Reserve, is the official digital currency issuer of the 4 chosen digital currencies in various denominations. All currencies are tracked to the euro, giving us the flexibility to track other currencies for the benefit of us all in times of financial crisis around the world. With every crisis, there's an opportunity, according to Klaus Schwab, whose mother is Nee Rothschild. So there you go. And of course, here, this is all blockchain-based nonsense, if you will. And these organizations, if you will, the UDCRF, the United Humanitarian Trust, and others are affiliated with the First Republic Registrar Foundation. And, of course, with the wallet, if you will, when I get to it, it says that the wallet has been specifically designed with the latest version 3.0 blockchain technology, providing one of the most advanced secure blockchain architectures on the market. As you may have noticed already, our wallet is a web-based application. It runs in a browser. A connection is established to a trusted node in the network that serves as a gateway to the rest of the ecosystem. So you can't really market this as private, as I've already explained, using the transhuman crypto cloud mind of Melanie Swan's, her article, if you will. And then, as well, we know that Bitcoin was created by the NSA. So, and then under sensitive research technologies, if you will, that's where the National Research Council of Canada has ledger-based systems under, which is what blockchain is. This says, welcome to the Digital Reserve, an entity set up by the United Humanitarian Trust to bring forward new financial systems and mechanisms of transactions, secure storage of wealth and value for long-term prosperity to nations around the world, transferring value between nations as well as funding large-scale and long-term projects. Using our secure, robust instruments in the form of our coin-based digital asset technology and procedures for implementing humanity's journey into the future. Yeah, okay, so basically a transhuman future is what they want, essentially, because the United Humanitarian Trust, if you will, and then we're going to dive into something called the World Citizens Alliance, if you will. There are different certificates, if you will, and all of these organizations are attached to the blockchain, if you will. So what I'm saying is that the digital person or the digital twin of you is essentially created for the purpose of being used in this Sestuar KB trust, in this new wallet that they're setting up, and in this CQB trust, which is your person, if you will. So CQB trust is, like I said, where the driver's license and even native status cards, for instance, are attached to. And so when you sign something, a signature is monetized in all capital letters, like the word capital means money, basically. Your essentially court systems are like over glorified banks, if you will. And so these people are really just remodeling that system and turning it into something worse, is what they're doing through Web3 technology, also known as blockchain. So the United Humanitarian Trust works with various governments and sovereign nations within the regions of Africa, Asia Pacific, South America, and the surrounding islands, Caribbean, Bahamas, and Virgin Islands. We seek to assist these nations and regions to become self-sufficient in the areas of food, energy, water. We also strive to assist with banking, asset management, and eco-wealth creation needs, all for the greater good of each nation and its people, if you say so. Plans and technologies are ecologically inclined, geared towards helping nations develop an infallible sustainability so that each nation can flourish and prosper through well-researched and managed UHTF-driven programs and projects. So using terms like sustainability, they're referring to the Sustainable Development Goals which is exactly what the standardization organizations follow for mandates to carry out the biodigital convergence agenda. So, serving humanity for the better, and they give some examples of technologies here, such as for mining and using what they call environmentally friendly technology. I don't really think so. Anaerobic digesters, water capture and storage facilities, solar water pumps to supply fresh water, if you say so, renewable energy and production of power plant capacities, upscale farming, production of existing crop for local farmers. I have talked about smart farming before as well, and aspects like cybernetics and the blockchain are really, and digital twin technology is all used in smart farming and smart agriculture as a whole. So we'll also build new and modern towns with all main infrastructure to show the model of future for each nation. We will incorporate all the latest technology in food, energy, and water, plus waste management, sanitation, food plant installations, and fish farm installations. We aim to grow and develop along with nations, government, infrastructure, and other projects internally to support growth. We encourage eco-wealth financing. And the headquarters of the United Humanitarian Trust Fund is in New Cairo, Egypt. So, yeah, this is all going in a smart agenda, if you will, right? One with smart infrastructure, and one that plays right into the convergence in and of itself. And so, this world citizen government, if you will, was founded in 1953 and is the political embodiment of world citizenship linked to world law, promotes respect for universal rights, and affirms everyone's right to identify as world citizens and issues documents of global identification and travel. So, we'll have to dive into this one a little bit further into other videos, if you will. It says dedicated to world citizenship, human rights, and a sustainable earth, provider of the world passport, world citizen card, and other world documents. So yeah, like I said, I will dive into this organization a little bit further in future because they have different world government commissions, if you will. And so what's interesting is they have a cybernetics commission, design science commission, economics commission, and several of them. But the one I want to draw everybody's eyes to is the World Planetary Vision Commission, which was led by the now deceased Barbara Marx Hubbard. So it's interesting that I connected the ideas and philosophies that Dan has revolving around the occult with the True North Guardians Alliance, and how they parallel Barbara Marx Hubbard's vision, as well as the Jesuits, and as well Alice Bailey of the Lucis Trust. So, yeah, this is a big organization for sure to cover. So, now to move forward, I was in Brampton at this particular address near this courthouse, if you will. I went with Josephine LaValle on September 13th in Brampton, Ontario, and the first thing that she and I noticed was William Denby's truck, who is a fake chief of sorts. We'll be getting to speaking about him eventually. And then I spoke with Derek Noonan here. And so, Derek Noonan, when I approached him, he mentioned that the last time we saw each other was in Goderich. He's referring to the time that Josephine and I ended up, and also others, ended up questioning the Canadian military in what they were doing for the quote-unquote Trillium Venture exercise. People can see those videos. If they want, like I said, I'll leave links in the description or pinned in the comments, and I would actually recommend going onto the part 3 video. I have all of the live streams there linked, so people can watch Josephine or I's live streams of either confrontations with the military, and as well the phone call conversations that we had with them where we were given the runaround and they passed the buck. So I asked Derek Noonan here if he got the chance to interview General Josh Major of 4th Division, as I was asking about him at that time in May when investigating the Trillium Venture exercise. Derek Noonan claims he did interview General Josh Major, and I asked him how he ended up getting a hold of him, and he claimed that Josh was on his live at the base camp with a media officer. The media officer is Paul Verkey, who I had spoke to on the phone and also in person. Josephine and I both spoke to him. Noonan said it was mostly his group that did the interview, and I mentioned I never got the chance to speak to General Josh Major. I don't think Derek Noonan ever did as well. I think he's just lying. And as well, I asked him how long he was in the military for, as he claims to be a Canadian military veteran. He said about 10 years. He said he wasn't really a combat vet. He did a few tours. And I asked if he did it part-time on the sly while he was in school, and he said, oh yeah, you can always go back to reserve status. And I asked what he took in school, and he said business administration. He said he did a few odd jobs here and there and owns his own business now, and I asked if his business is Black Flag Media, and I couldn't really make out entirely what he was saying because he was speaking quite quietly and softly. But he said that with his media business, it helped him with the protesting he does and it got him to see Jagmeet Singh at a media conference at Ryerson, but it doesn't mean he could get into every press conference. I asked if he's allowed on a CPAC, and he said yes, but he is not allowed in a parliament. So I asked him about the event going on, and that this was a white flag event, and that I saw Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly and True North Guardians Alliance on a white flag event. And he said that Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly has been working hard for 5 years. He said that someone from Lakeshore Sovereignty was charged with harassment for sending documents. All of that was related to the lockdown, if you will. The C lockdown. I'm not going to say that specific C word because I want this video to be here on YouTube still. The defense of this was taken from common law, and the illness itself was never isolated. The other issue in this case is also due process followed by the Charter and the Bill of Rights. The Attorney General violated the Charter. Did the Attorney General do due process? Noonan says no. Nothing to this date has been released in a formal matter other than various comments by politicians. The other person sitting next to Noonan said something about destroying the evidence, but I couldn't really make out what she said. From what I understand, the person that is charged with harassment that they were talking about from Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly is Dan Oake, and he had sent documents to the judge's place of residence from so I asked if people from 10 to noon came there, and Noonan said that Mississauga and Brampton and Lakeshore Assembly are all there. And I mentioned the white flags from the past published in David Mackenzie's Trucker magazine, which I showed at the beginning of this video, and Noonan said it's completely unrelated to the Save the Children convoy. And I said it's like a parlay then. He said yes, it has nothing to do with the Save the Children convoy. So I asked if it has nothing to do with the Save the Children convoy or Marcus Ray then. He says no, and I say it's interesting then because I'm talking to someone who's ex-military, and Marcus Ray's plans consisted of ex-military, so I consider that funny, but you'll get different walks of life with this whole thing. So Noonan mentions the flags of parlay, so I ask him to elaborate, and he says the white flags are not rectangular like most flags are rectangular, and that they're 18 inches by 18 inches. He said the flag of parlay symbolizes peace, and he says that all nation flags are rectangular except the Vatican and Switzerland. He says the parlay flag is by no means surrender, and that it symbolizes peace. So my understanding of this parlay flag is that it actually is a symbol for a desire to negotiate. So I asked Noonan what he hopes to achieve and what the end goal is if people are supposed to be brought to justice in a system that was never built for us. So Noonan said the end goal with all this is, are you live? He asks. He said that if you look at the live with Jack, you'll get what the end goal is. I think he's referring to a live he put on his Facebook. So I said that with the mandates and coercion with the freedom movement, what the freedom movement does is zero in on small things like the inoculation, but not the big picture, which is the biodigital convergence. And I brought up Crystal van der Elst and Policy Horizons, and I said that all avenues of industry are involved in this. Then I talk about the creation of graphene and the circular economy and what the term climate change actually means. So, anyway, moving forward, this guy, Steve Lesperance, from We the People Press, came by and asked if we were looking for the courtroom, and said it was room number 110. Steve says that he wasn't allowed to record and he got kicked out for attempting to record, and that he's going to lay private charges, but didn't say on who. So I told him about my YouTube channel, and he said his name is Brother Steve, were his words. He said he's the deputy chief, and here's another one of the counselors from Kawartha First Nations. Steve asked Noonan, Woodville or Cameron, and Noonan said Cameron. Steve said he has those meetings every Monday and is the camera guy, and Noonan said Chief Denby is inside. So this is a flyer for We the People Press that was given to Josephine and I. And then I'm going to move forward to show you Chief Denby over here. Just want to give it a second to load here. There's a lot of data, so take some time. So anyway, I ended up getting the chance to speak to Dan, and so I'll just talk about that briefly here. So I mentioned to Dan that I just heard he has his own dojo, and he confirms it was 2015 that he had opened it. And Dan says that all of the crimes against humanity going on, that the only dojo standing on the front lines are quote-unquote me and Sensei. I ask if he means Sensei Wallace Platt, to which he says yes. He says that his Sensei has been on the front lines dealing with this since the mid-80s. So I mentioned CMAC, which is the umbrella organization for the dojos, and Fudo Shin, his dojo, is within that umbrella. So starting in I said it was starting in 1985, and Dan corrected me that it actually started in 1983. So with that being said, I asked him about what the North American Military Alliance is, and I mentioned hearing that Dan is connected to the military, so I asked him to shed some light. So Dan says there's certain NDAs, he's referring to non-disclosure agreements, that you get under right, but the basic idea that I can say publicly is there's some really good generals that have been doing some great work all the way a long way, and they've endorsed us, like Major General Valalay was just on the live stream with us over there, and then General McInerney has reached out to us as well. But ultimately, as we report these crimes to the military, because these are war crimes, in the Law of War Manual, Section 11.10.1 is actually the authority to suspend ordinary courts. Basically, when the judiciary isn't doing their job, it's being criminal and continuing to attack the population. You're like, okay, well, geez Louise, who do I get to hold them to account? It's not going to be the courts. The courts can't hold the courts to account, right? So you have to go to higher authorities to do that. But ultimately, when it really comes down to is we, the people, have our duties and responsibilities that we have to do. That's what it's always been, right? Whether it was the citizens' arrests of mayors that we did, or whether it was the notices that we sent, everything has always been in, and you would have heard it today, it's always been under the duty of care. It's always been under lawful duties and responsibilities, and just trying to get this evidence out too. And I think you heard it today, even when the judge is saying RCMP, OPP, Regional Police, International Criminal, like, we hit everybody with evidence to let them know, like, hey guys, there's a crime going on here. And what you saw in there was that there seems to be a different level of what harassment applies to. The harassment done to all of us, children, it doesn't seem to matter, right? Because apparently all we're doing is trying to enforce quote-unquote ideological beliefs. You heard them say that in there. So we continue to do exactly what we do. So just want to pause for a second because it was lagging. This is William Denby, who is a part of this Kawartha First Nations, if you will. And so we'll be getting to speaking about him momentarily. But and I'll be leaving links in the description for the live streams that occurred as well. And so I asked Dan, how does the military hold the court to account when the military served the corporation but also served the crown in the case of Canada? And he says, actually, we gave the Canadian military an opportunity to do so. We're not talking about that. We've actually been in touch with a judge, advocate general in Canada, couple years ago, and they confirmed exactly what you're saying. They consider their commander-in-chief to be the governor general. And I asked, the governor general is a crown position, right? Because it is the federal representative of the monarchy in Canada. So Dan says, bingo. And in addition to that, they're like, we're not going to action anything against our CIC, our commander-in-chief. So we gotta give them a chance too, right? But what I would recommend for anybody to do, if you want to look into it yourself, we've got the evidence in the peace treaty, so it's tgpeacetreaty.com. Put everything there, including 12 exhibits that we had on the record for these proceedings, as well as amongst other things. And there's a really good explanation. It's not the only one out there, but there's a really good explanation out there by Derek Johnson. He's got some things together put in called the documents. He's got a book out there called The Midnight Rider that could give people an idea of what's going on, but of course it's not the only source out there. But ultimately, if you look at everything that's happening on the back end, let's say, and we have some friends in the States that have gone through some interesting processes, and gone through the court process as well and been exonerated, but let's just say there's some signals that things are happening in a positive way, but regardless of what the military can or cannot do, ultimately their oath is supposed to be to the people. If people decide that they want to remain enslaved, then they follow that. If we act upon proof and principle and show that, hey, we can actually take care of our own business and we don't have to put a group affiliation or flag anything like that, like we have communities, we have friends, families, we stand up for them and do the work for each other and stand on what's true. I saw, and so I said that I saw the Peace Treaty website and there's a lot there, and I mentioned that I saw some stuff in there about ASMIN, so I asked if he's part of ASMIN. Dan says no, so I ask why it's on there. Just to correct, even though this is what I said when I was speaking to him, the ASMIN are actually on the International Tribunal website that is ran through Alfred Weber. So, but it's linked through the Peace Treaty website and states that members of the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly or True North Guardians Alliance worked alongside the judges of this tribunal as well as serving as judges on some of their rulings. So, Josephine, who was with me, asked what the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly is, and Dan said it's just a group of us from the Halton region. So I clarify what I'm saying and mention there were some documents from the ASMIN, and that to me it's a little bit weird because the ASMIN support UNDRIP. Basically, to paraphrase, they could slap a label of Indigenous on anything, and Indigenous is not defined, right? So I'd be no more Indigenous than an actual Native, right? So the other factor too is they work heavily with the blockchain, or what some people might call the quantum financial system. If you follow the Q stuff, and the blockchain is part of this thing called the Biodigital Convergence. They say if you've heard of Policy Horizons, they were created by the Privy Council, and show him the shirt I'm wearing, which happens to be in that photo, and what I'm wearing right now. Dan says he hasn't heard of them, so I suggest he checks out my channel, and I keep talking and say the blockchain is like the backbone. It's a smart infrastructure toward anything that you would be. When I say biodigital convergence, I mean blurring the lines between what is digital and biological, basically cyborging us in layman's terms, and they follow the Sustainable Development Goals, which is actually on the back of my shirt, and I show him. So Dan jokingly says that's a real convenient t-shirt, and I know, right? So we both chuckled. And I jokingly said I rehearsed for this event right here. And Dan says, the version of that is, Glenn Bogue. You know who Glenn Bogue is, right? And I said, yes, he's a lawyer for the ASMIN. Dan says, I know some people that work with him, but I don't. You'll have to point me to the thing of ASMIN that we reference in the TG Peace Treaty. I honestly can't think of that, and if I did, you might be thinking of the International Natural and Common Law Tribunal for Public Health and Justice, because I think early on they might have done some work with ASMIN, but I really, and then so I end up asking if they work for the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly or True North Guardians Alliance, and Dan asks if I'm asking if they work with the ASMIN or Tribunal or either one of them, and I clarify asking if the Lakeshore Sovereign Assembly or True North Guardians Alliance work with either ASMIN or the Tribunal. And Dan says, ASMIN? No. But like I said, I have a friend who works with Glenn Bogue, and he and I don't see eye to eye on the UNDRIP thing. Let's say, but you know what? The friend of mine, I know the quality of what he's done on the back end. Some people in this have had their thinking, and their strategy is we can use the good parts of that and just not use the bad part of that. And I said, I understand what you're saying, but yeah. And he goes on, and I'm like, you, and he goes, and I'm like, you know what? Cool, fine, but I don't have to do that. We don't have to do that, but what, like, nor am I going to try to stop them from doing what they're doing, right? Like, our thing is keep the message nice and simple, focus. And we got interrupted by somebody waiting, that was waiting for Dan for something, and Josephine asked for 2 more minutes, and I reiterated that will only be 2 minutes. So Dan agrees, and Dan says, focus on the children and take action in your local community and stand up for truth. And Josephine says, you don't want to be a part of ASMIN because Anne Wolfe is the ambassador and she's pushing digital blockchain IDs. So, and Dan says, you know what? And put up his hand. And I said, evolve blockchain. So somebody asked what the indictment, and about the indictment, and I asked Dan who his friend is that's working with Glenn Bogue, and Dan said, I don't think that would be very nice. And I said, I understand that, but if somebody is in the public and they're putting themselves out in the public, right? And Dan said that and I asked Dan to at least give me a group, and he said Alliance of Indigenous Nations, which doesn't actually narrow it down at all, because these fake native groups like the Peoples of the Salmon, ASMIN, and others all actually fall under that Alliance of Indigenous Nations umbrella. So Dan says, and I don't know everybody from there, but the people that I have that I do know, they've been fighting for the right side and doing the right thing, even if we don't see eye to eye on how to approach. I thanked Dan for his time and shook his hand. So this is not about whether you see eye to eye on certain approaches or not. Like, we can disagree on what our favorite color is, but we can't sit there and work with people that are part of different nefarious agendas in and of itself. And of course, as well, Dan was definitely quite nervous when Evolve Blockchain was brought up, and when the ASMIN was brought up in and of itself. So, as I had demonstrated, the ASMIN worked with Alfred Weber on that court, which Dan had also mentioned himself. So, my point here is that, yes, they are working with the ASMIN. So, and he wasn't able to give me the name of his friend, who is, of course, out in the public eye, so that doesn't really make any sense. So, this is Chief William Denby, who I had already scrolled by before. Chief William Denby, who's not even a real chief. We saw in the courtroom and also outside the courthouse, and we saw his truck, and so we see him working with Anne Wolfe, and We the People Media has a YouTube channel, and they have not only worked with Anne Wolfe, as we see William Denby working with Anne Wolfe here, but Steve Lesperance, the guy who called himself Brother Steve, if you will, is deputy chief at the Kawartha First Nation band, which isn't even a real First Nations reservation, if you will, and not even a real nation. So this is the We the People Press. And then, of course, William Denby on his Facebook is promoting Ask It for Equity, which is how you actually sign up for a membership for ASMIN. So there you have it. And then, of course, there is as well another fake chief named David Gray Eagle, which we'll be looking at as well. And this is the whole network, if you will. My logo here is covering up Kawartha First Nation, but this is the whole network, the whole Kawartha network, if you will. So this is a public notice issued by the Williams Treaties First Nations, if you will. Just let me zoom in and make this easier to read. Alderville First Nation, Chippewas of Basole First Nation, I apologize for the pronunciation. Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, Chippewas of Rama First Nation, Curve Lake First Nation, Hiawatha First Nation, and Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, collectively Williams Treaties First Nations, unequivocally assert our rights, interests, and stewardship over our traditional and treaty territories, which include our lands, waters, and submerged lands covered by Treaties 5, 16, 18, 20, 27, 27 and a quarter, the Collins Treaty, the Crawford Treaty, the Gunshot Treaty, and the Williams Treaties. We wish to advise the public of the actions and representations of an individual named William Denby, who has been falsely representing himself as an Indigenous person and claiming to speak for a group called Kawartha Lakes First Nation and Assembly of Kawartha First Nations. Mr. Denby and members of his group falsely claim to be Indigenous people and illegitimately assert rights and authority over lands that fall within Treaty 18, Treaty 20, and the Gunshot Treaty. Solemn agreements that were entered into between our ancestors and the Crown, over which our First Nations have constitutionally protected Aboriginal and treaty rights, and Mr. Denby and his group have no legitimate Aboriginal claims. In addition, Mr. Denby has also made public statements claiming that he was delegated authority from Alderville First Nation. We wish to make it known emphatically that neither Denby nor any entity he purports to represent has been given any authority by Alderville First Nation or any other Williams Treaties First Nations to act or speak in any capacity on our behalf. The claims made by Mr. Denby are not only false but potentially disruptive to our rights to be consulted on activities that may adversely impact our Aboriginal and treaty rights within our territories, as protected under Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. Mr. Denby and his group's assertions are of indigeneity and rights over our lands are made without any factual basis. They have no connection to any Indigenous community in the Kawartha Lakes region or beyond. These types of claims not only cause public confusion, but also undermine the legitimate consultation processes to protect Indigenous peoples' rights and interests. Making false claims to indigeneity and misrepresenting Indigenous perspectives in public meetings is detrimental to the reconciliation process. We have demanded that Mr. Denby cease all misrepresentations regarding having any authority in relation to the lands and rights of the Williams Treaties First Nations. His attendance in our communities constitute trespass on our lands. His racist and misogynistic statements regarding our citizens will not be tolerated in Williams Treaty's First Nations. We'll take any necessary legal action to protect our citizens' rights and interests. We thank the public and all stakeholders for their attention to this matter and for their continued respect and recognition of the legitimate right holders of these lands and waters, issued by the Williams Treaty's First Nations over there. So I'll show you why we had a picture of Maggie Hope Braun there. Okay, Chief William Denby, I should really stop calling him that because he isn't any legitimate chief. He did a deputation to the city of Kawartha Lakes on November 7th, 2023 through Kickley. And Kickley is Maggie Hope Braun initiative, and Denby is a part of that, obviously. So, and this is Kickley in and of itself, which is her play on words for Ickley, which is like a localized Agenda 21 type of initiative, if you will. But unfortunately, these deputations have some degree of lackluster information, because while Maggie is fixated on talking about Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and the BS that revolves around climate change, she is not actually talking about the biodigital convergence in and of itself, and strays far away from that as a gatekeeper. So basically, she doesn't talk about the standardization organizations or research councils that are involved in the convergence in and of itself. And as a matter of fact, nothing about the biodigitalization agenda is mentioned, or the circular economy and use of waste to create graphene for the purposes of twinning the environment into the metaverse. This is what climate change is actually referring to, and this is what Maggie Braun will not address. In the deputation, Denby mentions he reviewed the budget and mentions tribute homes where they move 100 loads an hour on the highway, and they do on Country Lane to Braunpeel's gravel pit. He says he informed them that they're moving, quote-unquote, our ancestral remains. So he asked for $500 million in damages. He also claims to have 15 of his band council members who are all First Nations and 7 non-First Nation members that have been acknowledged in international courts, quote-unquote, that we do own Kawartha Lakes. So him talking about ancestral remains is despicable, because he's not actually native, if you will, and being a member of ASMIN sure as hell does not count for being native. So him using this ploy of ancestral remains, if you will, is nothing short of a con. So I'm going to read a little bit about Denby over here in this article of the Guardian. And so it says here, local chiefs claim Kawartha Lakes First Nation as part of a wave of cases in which people falsely claim indigenous identity. So the only thing, though, about the band councils, and I guess about the media too, is they use the term indigenous, right? And the band councils are also, unfortunately, all for UNDRIP. But more important, so that's the common ground that they actually have with the ASMIN. But unfortunately, with Denby here, he's claiming to have native status of sorts, or he's claiming to be native and uses these ancestral remains that he claims to have as an excuse to get a payout from city council. So, the headquarters of the Kawartha Lakes First Nation sits off a single-lane highway 100 miles northeast of Toronto, between signs advertising the sale of all-terrain vehicles, hand-scrawled messages on the 3 buildings decry government corruption. At the center of the lot, near signs for the Redneck Church and Chief Willie's Man Cave, stands a 26-foot teepee, alongside banners commemorating MMIW and the victims of Canada's residential school system. Confederate flags flap gently in the wind. Yeah, that's actually true. To its 20 members, this is the heart of Canada's newest First Nation, but 7 local Indigenous chiefs claim it is the site of a brazen fraud that threatens to erode their hard-fought constitutional rights. In recent years, Canada has grappled with a wave of pretendian cases in which people falsely claim Indigenous identity. Meanwhile, the use of Indigenous symbols and slogans has grown increasingly common among the country's far right, as they say. Members of Kawartha Lakes First Nation argue they are exempt from laws in Texas, echoing the rhetoric of extremist sovereign citizens movement, and the group's emergence has raised concerns over how groups might use Indigenous identity to lay claim to land or demand concessions from local and provincial governments. So, term like sovereign citizen, if you will, is just used to lump people into categories when they say certain words or believe in certain things. And fact of the matter is, me talking about the Sestru KB trusts and stuff like that, I could even be lumped into that category too, if you will. So it's all just a product of social engineering there. However, fact of the matter is that Denby is just a con man, if you will, masquerading as a chief and trying to get money from the city by claiming that they dig up his ancestral remains when he's not even native. So, as far as I'm concerned, even though the band councils and stuff like that support UNDRIP, Denby is just a whole different brand of evil, is what he is. So, among 2 months ago, Denby and the self-proclaimed chief of the Kawartha group began sending emails to local chiefs, municipal, provincial officials. The messages seen by The Guardian were often written in all caps and combined grievances and increasingly bold claims. Denby protested against the destruction of farmland for housing developments and made broad allegations of corruption. He also said he was the hereditary leader of forgotten Indigenous land and claimed his group had rights to nearly 5,800 square miles of land, right here as listed. And so, at first, Tanar Simpson, chief of Alderville First Nation, ignored the near daily emails, but then he said, against my better judgment, I decided to respond. Simpson is one of Canada's leading Indigenous genealogical consultants, and his work has been critical in reaching historic financial settlements for widespread abuse at residential schools, as well as the episode known as the 60s Scoop, in which Indigenous children are forcibly placed in foster care. So, says, I asked Denby for any evidence of his claim because I know pretty much everything about First Nations people in this territory, and told him I never heard of this group before, said Simpson. And it says that Simpson is one of Canada's leading genealogical experts. Sorry, excuse me, I already read that. In email correspondence between the two seen by The Guardian, Denby, a businessman and former mayoral candidate in the region, told Simpson he was in possession of records dating back to 1780 that proved, quote-unquote, our ancestors were on this land for over 30,000 years, but he failed to produce any documentation to support his claims of Indigenous ancestry. But it wasn't until Denby appeared before Kawartha Lake City Council a few weeks later that Simpson grasped the scale of the group's aims. Denby stepped up to the microphone to say Alderville First Nation had transferred all authority of the region over to him. He put this on record, and I was like, are you kidding me? I never said anything like that, Simpson said. So, the group's apparent readiness to make questionable claims in a bid for territory, in this case the entirety of Kawartha Lakes, alarmed Simpson and the chiefs of 6 other nations that are signatories to the 1923 Williams Treaties. In a rare joint statement, the chiefs warned Denby and his group were illegitimately asserting rights and had no ancestral connection to any of the region, and warned they would take any necessary legal action to protect our citizens' rights and interests. Denby called the statement lies and told supporters he had sued the chiefs for slander. The city of Kawartha Lakes also said Denby's group lacks any connection to a historical Indigenous community in the region, and his claims were a disservice to legitimate rights holders. Denby's claims of Indigenous ancestry and of a great-great-great-great-uncle Firebolt also caught the attention of local genealogy enthusiasts, who created a blog to catalog and debunk the claims by Denby and the group, calling itself the Kawartha Lake First Nation. I wanted to see who his Indigenous ancestor might be, but I couldn't actually find one which doesn't mean there isn't one, but almost certainly there isn't one within at least 6 generations or 5 generations, said the genealogist, who asked not to be named to avoid potential harassment. So Denby has claimed both Ojibwe and Mohawk ancestry, and also told supporters that anyone born in Canada is Native. Denby also claims that he is a descendant of the Kawartha tribe, but the genealogist points out that the name Kawartha was created in the late 1800s as part of a tourism campaign to rebrand the Trent Valley. So there you have it. And on a recent afternoon, the group's camp was quiet. Denby was not present, according to his wife, who said he's probably out raising hell. Multiple calls to his phone went unanswered, and Steve Lesperance, who Denby made a deputy chief, declined to comment. So, and then you have on April 26th, Denby was arrested and charged with criminal harassment, uttering threats and intimidation of a justice system participant. During his bail hearing, a Crown lawyer read from an email sent from Denby to a number of city councillors that led police to detain the self-proclaimed chief. And then he says, "We do not want to start to kill, poison, bury every one of you or your families if you do not stop coming, if you do not stop destroying our farmland. We know where you all live. Nobody wants to have to go this far, but we will. This is your final warning," the attorney read in court. "You have no idea how well organized we are and how much firepower we have in storage," the email said. So Denby has not yet entered a plea, and none of the charges have been proven in court. The far-right strategy of using Indigenous identity to claim a right to lands has concerned researchers who see the move as a threat to legitimate Indigenous groups. So everything gets labeled far-right. This is part of social engineering in the media. Media is a word which actually is a Greek sorceress who casts illusions, but the fact of the matter is that Denby fits the persona and identity of what the media would brand as far right or sovereign citizen, if you will. So a narrative is always controlled on both sides, as we know. So like the band councils are in support of UNDRIP, and same with the fake native nations such as the ASMIN, right? So it says here they seem to believe that if they can finagle a land claim, if they can call themselves a First Nation, they'll get their own little fiefdom with their own laws, said Veldon Coburn, a professor at the University of Ottawa's Institute of Indigenous Research Studies. So, the use of what Coburn calls a potpourri of Indigenous iconography has become a growing trend among far-right groups. Romana Didulo, the QAnon figure who has proclaimed herself the Queen of Canada, uses the motto, Kitchi Manitou Oskahihin. I apologize for the pronunciation of that. It's a rough Cree language translation of God loves you. And during the Freedom Convoy occupation of Ottawa 2 years ago, truckers pinned Every Child Matters flags to their vehicles, a phrase associated with victims of the Indigenous residential schools, and then protesters held pipe ceremonies and lit a sacred fire against the wishes of the Algonquin Nation. So, this about sums that up right there. This whole, what happens, unfortunately, with this, for lack of a better word, sovereign citizen, common law type of outlook. A lot of these people actually are part of these fake Indigenous nations, if you will, and this is how they, assert their quote-unquote sovereignty, if you will. So just want to go very briefly into something here. This is David Grey Eagle Sanford. He is also another fake chief, if you will. And so we could see him speaking at Denby's place there, and there's a nice Confederate flag in the background. This right here is from a video of mine entitled Unity or Freedom, de jure or de facto. And so we see in the Alliance of Indigenous Nations, we have David Grey Eagle's signature right there as well. So he is a part of those fake native nations, if you will. So as well now. There's this show called the Sovereign Soul, which is ran by this guy who's obviously looking at his phone or has fallen asleep, Brad Wozny. And so the same day this episode that I'm looking at came around, actually at the same time on September the 13th, this was aired. And so on this particular show, if you will, what happened was they had Derek Noonan, they had Dan Oake, his wife Yayoi, and then as well you have his student Akwasi over here, and you have Kaylin, who is a 23-year-old nurse, and Akwasi is also a member of the True North Guardians Alliance. So, and Yayoi, which is Dan's wife, is a former kindergarten to grade 8 teacher that lost her job, quote unquote, over all of this, and she's referring to the mandates and coercive measures and such. So, in this outlet, both Brad Wozny and Rob Cunningham both advocate for crypto and the quantum financial system, which is basically just another way of saying the blockchain, and have even conveyed a narrative that through something called Operation Sandman is where the BRICS nations are trying to replace the US dollar as the world reserve currency. We're going to talk about the BRICS nations now. They support the blockchain as well. So it's really, Team A, Team B between the BRICS nations, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, versus like Canada and the US, for instance. Team A, Team B, both are for the convergence. And then Derek Noonan brings up Bill C-293 and as well Bill C-63. Not sure what Bill C-63 is, but Bill C-293 kind of is a Canadian bill that sort of mirrors the World Health Organization treaty. And then Scotty Sachs here ended up asking Derek and Dan to give updates on the court proceeding. And so Dan names off all the people that I had mentioned there. And 2 charges were laid out in court: contempt of court and criminal harassment. So Dan says, because of course apparently sending reports to the proper authorities and notifying the people that are committing the crimes is criminal harassment, so and desperately trying to save children's lives is criminal harassment. So the contempt of court, for whatever reason, they found that as not guilty, and then we're apparently guilty of criminal harassment, but again, it's not us that are guilty. They're charging the birth certificate. They're committing fraud, so this is what's really interesting. The next date, which is supposed to be our sentencing day, is going to be November 20th. We're going to be living in a very different world by November 20th. And Rob Cunningham says, yes, we are. Dan continues, so, Scotty, if possible, maybe September 28th is possible. I might be able to shake some hands and meet some people. We'll see about that, right? But ultimately, there was also really, really important and really powerful is that they added on their record. It's already out there in the ethers. All the military have got it. Major General has got it. He's referring to Major General Paul Vallely. And he says our grand jury indictment and summary is out there, but it is now on the record. They literally walked out of the courtroom today and said, hey, we've been notified by court security that this document here and my name's on it, and, and these people are on it. So they now have the formal indictment under not only the common law, SCC law, and the law of war manual by our grand jury that's on the record. Apparently they haven't had the time to go through it, but a huge, huge victory in between now and November 20th. My goodness, can we all actually start to stand up and rise up and do something about this? And what's extra powerful as well is there were 2 children in the courtroom that their parents are part of the assembly, and they wanted their children to witness that and really see what's been going on. So this part of our grand jury summary as well. He holds up a document entitled Homicide Trial Record, but it's a 427-page criminal code document alone summary right here that's part of the grand jury indictment and everything like that. So a few of the highlights, then I'll ask Quasi and Kaylin if they remember anything that I might have forgotten. Criminal harassment in their mind. No, sorry, what we did is in the attempts to save life and expose the fraud. And as we said that we were going to do, they filed it under OPCA, Organized Pseudo-Legal Commercial Arguments. And what they make very clear in there is that their version of an affront, and using their words, a serious affront to the rule of law, is anybody who challenges their authority and anybody that just doesn't file records in a way that they want to do it. And that's what they consider to be criminal harassment. It has nothing, no mention to do with, oh, this is another one. What they were saying is that we were attempting to force our, I quote, ideological beliefs on them. No mention about the Criminal Code of Canada violations. No mention, well, actually it was on the record and they spoke about it quite a bit, but all the treaty violations, everything there, they just said that reporting these things was an affront to the rule of law, and it was akin to bringing in people to intimidate a jury in a trial like that, rather than having people desperately using the rule of law, international covenants and treaties, Criminal Code of Canada, creating incident numbers, creating occurrence numbers, no investigation for 4 years. Oh no, all we're doing is trying to enforce our ideological beliefs, not the scientific reality, not the rule of law. That's what they were saying that we were trying to do, and they categorized that as criminal harassment, and what they believe November 20th to be is the sentencing day. But of course, they're in for something else. But they've got the grand jury summary and indictment. It's on the record that they have been served, and we've got other work and steps that we can do, and we've got other works and steps that we can do, but it's very interesting. Is there anything that I missed, friends? That we were the ones that were obstructing justice. It's like calling the kettle black right there, but by trying to hold and demanding the criminals are held to account for their obstruction of justice, we were apparently obstructing justice. This, where everybody in the courtroom remained calm, held our white flags, declared state of neutrality, declared state of peace, no surrender, but they obviously have no intention of peacefully negotiating now, and it's all been put out there on the record. So between now and November 20th, we, the world, have a lot of work to do. And Dan mentions a bioweapon terrorizing the world. So Brad asks everyone to name their names for the court of public record for we the people, so that men and women can look back at this video and see each one of you perfectly and hear from yourself your name as a sovereign man or woman who have literally made history today on behalf of serving humanity's peace, love, and freedom. So they mention themselves. And Dan mentions when he was doing citizens' arrest of mayors in 2020 to 2021, which, let me just say about this citizens' arrest of mayors, it's my understanding that nobody actually got arrested, just that people were reading a script like a play, if you will. Mentions when he was doing citizens' arrest of mayors in 2020 to 2021 that the message is the same, but the knowledge has increased. Take local action for national impact. Hold these people to account or demand that they're held to account because there's difference. The military will hold them account. We demand that they're held to account. So he's calling in the military is what he's basically attempting to do here. Scotty Sachs makes mention that he likes that the patriot freedom fighters across North America are all using the same language. Local action equals national impact is Mike Flynn's absolute commitment to everybody to get the message out. So Mike Flynn was a national security advisor in 2016 for the first 22 days of the Trump administration and former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. And this phrase Local action equals national impact sounds a lot like the globalist phrase, think globally, act locally, is what it really boils down to. So Dan wants to call in the American military, if you will, and these people as well to show outlet that he's on are people pushing the quantum financial system, which is the blockchain. So they're all for the convergence, and the Q in QAnon really stands for quantum. So this is one of the generals here that was mentioned to me, Thomas McInerney. Sounds like Bert and Ernie, but anyway, political commentator and retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General, and he was a forward air controller and fighter pilot during the Vietnam War and flown 407 combat missions during his 4 tours of duty. In addition to his Vietnam service, he served overseas in NATO, Pacific Air Forces, and as commander of 11th Air Force in Alaska. So, since his retirement in 1994, he's been on the boards of several military contractors, frequent guest of Fox News until 2018, when he claimed without evidence that John McCain, whom he called Songbird John, betrayed his country when he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. He was a staunch advocate of the Iraq War and defended the use of torture and defended the Bush administration. And in 2008, it was revealed that the Pentagon under the Bush administration supplied McInerney with talking points to use in his commentary, interestingly enough. So then we have Paul Vallely, if you will. So Paul Vallely retired in 91 from the U.S. Army as Deputy Commanding General, U.S. Army Pacific in Honolulu, Hawaii, and he graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and was commissioned in the Army in 1961, serving a distinguishing career of 32 years in the Army. He served in many overseas theaters to include Europe and the Pacific Rim countries, as well as 2 combat tours in Vietnam. He served in U.S. security assistance missions on civilian-military relations to Europe, Japan, Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, and Central America, with in-country experience in Indonesia, Colombia, El Salvador, Panama, Honduras, and Guatemala. General Vallely is a graduate of the Infantry School, Ranger and Airborne Schools, Jump Master School, the Commander and General Staff School, the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, and the Army War College. His combat service in Vietnam included positions as Infantry Company Commander, Intelligence Officer, Operations Officer, Military Advisor, and Aide-de-camp. He has over 15 years experience in special operations, psychological and civil military operations. He was one of the first nominees for Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations under President Reagan. From 1982 to 1986, he commanded the 351st Civil Affairs Command that included all Special Forces, psychological warfare, and civil military units in the western United States and Hawaii. He was the first president of the National Psychological Operations Association. His units participated in worldwide missions in Europe, Africa, Central America, Japan, Solomon Islands, Guam, Belgium, Korea, and Thailand. And he served as a consultant to the commanding general of the Special Operations Command, as well as the DoD Anti-Drug Counter-Terrorist Task Forces. He also designed and developed a host nation support program in the Pacific for DoD and State Department. That's Department of Defense. Most recently, he has in-country security experience in El Salvador, Colombia, and Indonesia in the development of civil-military relations, interfacing with senior-level military and civilian leadership. General Vallely is a military analyst for Fox News and is a guest on many nationally syndicated radio talk shows. He's a guest lecturer on the War on Terror, and he's also co-authored a book entitled The Endgame: Winning the War on Terror. Yeah, whatever. Okay, so we can really trust a guy who was the president of a psychological operations organization, right? Of course, especially because the Q nonsense and blockchain stuff like that comes from his partners in crime, if you will. So this is the NNI, the National Nanotechnology Initiative. and it's been the driving force of the scientific community working on nanomaterials in the U.S. and an inspiration for the launch of nanotechnology programs elsewhere. Following a program by the Interagency Working Group on Nanotechnology presented in 1999, President Clinton launched the NNI in a speech at the California Institute of Technology on January 21st, 2000. On December 3rd, 2003, the NNI became law due to the so-called 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act signed by President Bush. Oh, interesting. It was the Bush administration that supplied Mick and Ernie, Bert and Ernie, whatever you want to call him, with his arguments that he used on Fox News. That's pretty funny here. And then, as well, a lot of these people that promote the QAnon stuff as well are people that favor and promote Donald Trump, and some even look at him as still being the president of the USA. We're going to get to talking about Trump in a second here. The 2 points of the law that are worth noting were the establishment of a National Nanotechnology Coordination Office with the aim of acting as a point of contact between the federal agencies participating in the initiative, as well as between researchers funded by such agencies and the public, in the setting up of external reviews to both assess and shape the activities of the NNI. So the NNI has been acting as a tool to bring together scientists with different backgrounds through working at the nanoscale. The coordination has also resulted in the establishment of the new nano-specialized experimental infrastructure and the optimized use of that already existing. Furthermore, the activities of the NNI have translated into the creation of excellence networks and centers in the U.S., such as the National Nano Manufacturing Network, the Center for Sustainable Nanotechnology, the National Nanotechnology Coordination Infrastructure, and the Nanosystems Engineering Research Center for Nanotechnology-Enabled Water Treatment. That's scary. Noteworthy are also the promotion of environmental health and safety studies as outlined by Lisa Friedersdorf and colleagues in their comment, and the extensive efforts on education and research by the NNCO. So, during the past 15 years, the NNI has evolved in shape and grown in size. The number of agencies participating in the initiative has grown from 5 to 33, and the NNI has received strong support from both Democratic and Republican administrations, with over $1.4 billion in the president's budget request for 2020. So there you have both Joe Biden and Donald Trump putting $1.4 billion into the NNI. So they're both involved in the biodigital convergence. And red and blue are really just colors of duality in this case, if you will, right? Both parties really are on board the same agenda, right? So this is about BRICS payment system, which is based on the blockchain. That's really all I wanted to state from this article here in and of itself. And then here is, I'm going to look at a few patents that have to do with something called LifeWave, if you will, because LifeWave is promoted on that Sovereign Soul show by Brad Wozny, and that's the one that Dan and Derek Noonan and others were on. So this particular wearable phototherapy apparatus embodiments enables a wearable phototherapy apparatus that produces beneficial, if you say so, effects to a human body, such as activation of stem cells, improvement in strength, improvement in stamina, pain relief via a non-transdermal container. May include an optional transdermal container that releases or increases copper peptide, GHK-Cu, in a subject's body. The non-transdermal apparatus reflects or emits specific wavelengths of light to elevate levels of the copper peptide in the body. The non-transdermal apparatus includes one or more materials that prevent the left-handed molecule from direct contact with the body, while the enclosure is coupled to the body and prevents the left-handed molecules from entering the body. Okay? And then this other biomolecular wearable apparatus. The invention relates to an apparatus that regulates the thermodynamic energy flow within a human body for producing what they call beneficial effects, and it goes on to repeat itself a little. According to one embodiment, the invention provides a wearable apparatus that may include biomolecular components for building up of thermomagnetic energy within the human body. According to another embodiment, the invention provides a wearable apparatus that may include biomolecular components for dilution of a thermomagnetic energy within the human body. According to yet another embodiment, the invention provides a wearable apparatus that may include biomolecular components having orthomolecular and or non-orthomolecular organic materials that are capable of thermomagnetic laboratory action and or thermomagnetic dextratory action. So, and then here, this is the final article, and then it just says light wave energy patches are novel nanoscale semiconducting biomolecular antennas that when placed in the oscillating bioelectromagnetic field of the body resonance at frequencies in unison with certain biomolecules in the cells and signal specific metabolic pathways to accelerate fat metabolism. So basically, in a nutshell, these things are using bioelectromagnetic energy to and frequencies to mess with our cellular structure. For me to put this into layman's terms, if you will. So these wearables as well are very well part of the biodigital convergence. So I'm going to speak now about the confrontation on September 16th in Ottawa. I went to Ottawa with Josephine LaValle and met up with James Scott there. And so James and I went to go speak to Derek Noonan. So Derek mentions that we asked about the white flag thing because we didn't see any white flags. And also something that is noteworthy is that both in Brampton and in Ottawa, I saw Gordon, and Gordon was not willing to speak to us in Brampton, and in Ottawa he gave us the cold shoulder to say the least, and even mouthed off to us, and even raised his voice. So he's obviously afraid to actually speak about what's going on, or even address this convergence in and of itself. So anyway, now to move forward about Derek Noonan here. I asked him about the white flag, and he said that the white flag thing might be down the road, and that they want a new government and wants to be more inclusive of First Nations. So when James asks if he thinks the new government would help the situation, Derek mentions wanting an electable summit, accountability factor, and try to destroy the party dynamic that we have where the local MP is more of a representative of that area. So I told Derek that when he speaks of this structural change, it reminds me of Evolved Blockchain, which is what Anne Wolfe is the face of, this direct democracy blockchain BS. So Derek says she's going in the direction of direct democracy, which is all citizens should vote on everything. So we do have an elected government, for example. So do they really get to choose the budget, or do the people? So with that particular system, the people would be almost voting on something continually, right? Almost every day there's something to vote on. He mentions that to transition to something like this, there needs to be subtle steps first. He said the first big step is to get rid of that Senate and to have a seat for First Nations from each province. And I asked if he's for a direct democracy system, and Derek said not at this time, but maybe down the road with some aspects to it. It's too much of a change. So James mentions the blockchain, and Derek says that you need the blockchain to do this. So Derek says, can blockchain be corrupted? That's the other thing. So I mentioned that crypto was created by the NSA, and Derek says it's all corrupted, so it's become a social credit system itself already. So all these things have to be purified before something like that I couldn't make out his last few words after that, but James Scott comes in and mentions that the National Research Council of Canada, under their sensitive technology research areas, are saying that all digital ledger systems are part of their advanced digital infrastructure, and all of the digital ledger technology is involved in the convergence. James then also brings up the transhuman crypto cloud mines and mentions that the blockchain is also involved in transhumanism. So I mentioned to Derek that James and I spoke about the transhuman crypto cloud mines on August 31st at Confederation Park when we spoke with Adrian Thomas of the Thunderbird Nationalist Movement, Kelly, Anne Wolfe, and others. And I explained to Derek that nodes are looked at as machines and human beings and that they're indistinguishable. So when someone tries to tell you a blockchain is decentralized, it's part of the convergence agenda and the backbone of smart infrastructure. So Derek then, he pauses for a period of time and then says, it's loss of identity, right? Everything that's proceeding this way is the loss of identity, and we have inalienable rights, and that's what we should be front and center, and that's what should be front and center, right? Everything that we do afterwards is honoring those inalienable rights, but I don't know if we can get humanity to that point. And I asked Derek about the black shoes he was wearing, and if anyone was speaking on CPAC, and he claimed that nobody was speaking on CPAC to his knowledge, and that he was hoping to meet up with some MPs later for a quick discussion. James said that if anybody is going to get on CPAC, that he hopes people in the freedom movement start to talk about the biodigital convergence. So on that much, I definitely agree with James Scott, and I'm not sure what MPs Derek met up with after. So this is Jason LaFaci. This will be the last segment of the video here. This is a live from August 6th, and in it, Druthers is promoted, and he says his chief is Chief Muckwa and is a member of ASMIN, and he's been for approximately 5 years. He says he's part of the Magdalen Islands Métis Band, and he says another group called ASMIN hijacked the group and has no affiliation to them. One of them is registered in Ontario, and one is registered in Manitowatch. The one on reserve is the actual one, but the one registered in Sandwich is registered, quote, by a bunch of idiots, he said. So, he says his experience with ASMIN has always been independent from the Crown as quote-unquote sovereigns and established sovereignty with the Crown as its own nation. So, they are on board UNDRIP. Hate to break it to you there, Jason, but you're putting out a false message there. And also, as well, they are part of the convergence agenda, and while I see you talking about how blockchain is fully hackable, you're not talking about how it's part of the convergence and part of smart infrastructure, so you should probably start doing that rather than gatekeeping. And also, as well, he said that during the convoy before the Emergencies Act was invoked, it was tabled in Parliament and was tailored to First Nations, Indigenous, and Métis people because there was a clause in the Emergencies Act that stated that anybody who identified as Métis or tribal, they weren't susceptible to arrest because it's their territory as a collective. And he said part of Jason's team in Ottawa collectively tried to get teepees to set up for a peace ceremony. There were 13 circles cleared out to put up 13 teepees, and they were provided by different nations such as Mohawk, Anishinaabe, etc. This is according to Jason here, so I'm not sure if all those nations actually put forth materials for the teepees or brought teepees. I very much doubt that, because he says that band officers were pissed because chiefs were siding with Chief White Duck, which are what he described as paid-off Trudeau chiefs. So, in this press release here, it says here, and this is Chief Dylan White Duck is on this, along with other chiefs. And it says the Algonquins of this region, the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation Tribal Council, and this Anishinaabe does not support the truckers' convoy and the Confederation Park setup on the Algonquin Nation lands and territory. And for greater certainty, the joint press release from the Algonquins, the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation Tribal Council, and this other Anishinaabe is to inform other Indigenous nations, public corporations, Government of Canada, Ontario, and their respective municipalities that the following chiefs listed here do not support what is happening on our traditional unceded territory. The actions that are taking place on our territory, Ottawa, is unacceptable. For those who are participating in these actions, the Algonquin Nation does not support the setup of a TP, the pipe ceremony, and a sacred fire in Confederation Park in support of the Freedom Convoy. The Algonquin Nation did not give consent for these ceremonial practices and could cause more harm to who we are as First Nations Algonquin people. First Nations and non-Indigenous people should always remember protocol and that permission from us needed to proceed. This letter is to serve notice that the Algonquin Nation does not support or endorse these actions in Confederation Park. If these actions continue, we have no other choice but to support the Ottawa Police in their efforts and actions to support this at once. Once again, we do not support the Freedom Convoy or any other movement that compromises the safety of our community leaders. And then you also have Chris LaMarche from Ottawa Police and Mayor Jim Watson as well. So, with this being said, he said that elders, clan mothers, hereditary chiefs, water protectors, fire protectors, let's say firekeepers, warriors, activist lineage, all got together and allied with the ASMIN, Chief Mukwa, and the goal was to contest the government together as a collective. He said that people had hijacked Confederation Park who had identified as whatever they were identifying, and then unfortunately the feed kind of got cut off a little bit, so he froze, and I'm not sure what he said after that. But he claims that Confederation Park was lost because of government plants. Clan mothers and some of the elders got together in a hall with J.D. Anderson, with someone from Sudbury, whose name he did not mention but referred to her as a her, with chiefs of Algonquin, mayor, and police officers saying they're putting a stop to the ceremony being done at Confederation Park, saying it was insulting. He also said that through no more lockdowns, he helped organize protests in Ontario for Randy Hillier, Derek Sloan, Maxime Bernier, and Roman Baber. Chelsea Hillier and Michael were a part of it, and he also said that Nolene Villebrun was the Grand Chief prior, and he said that Nolene is friend with his wife's cousin, Sandra McKenzie, who is also a clan mother from Sucker Creek First Nation. He said his wife's family was kicked off the reservation because they have blue eyes. I'm not sure about that whole story there. So, breaking this all down here, it sounds like the band councils were, at odds with the ASMIN, and rightfully so in this regard. The ASMIN have no legitimacy, and yes, the band councils are corrupt, but I don't agree with fake native nations getting together and putting together teepees for whatever mock celebration or ceremony that they were trying to do. So, part of a quote from Jason here, he says, what we should be working at is getting this government accountable, demanding that we don't let them back into power, go back into day-to-day business in September because we have traitors in the effing house. It's our house. They're our employees, and they're going to resume day-to-day business, knowing there's traitors in the government. No, that shouldn't happen. There should be an automatic effing election, and there should be arrests made right now, and the names of those guilty should be named to the public because we put our trust in a democratic process for these people to be elected, and if they've broken the law, especially treason, don't you think that those names should be public so that the Canadian collective can hold them to account, so that they can get charged, so that they can get removed from power, so we can call a fair election and clean it up? It goes on, but he uses the word accountability and talks about holding these guilty of treason to account. And I've already found Derek Noonan using that term, Dan used that term, and several of these other, freedom fighters, for lack of better words, are using this term accountability, and it's all part of brainwashing and subconscious programming. So, I'm just going to close this now and basically say that people should be focusing on protecting the water. So you can look at findaspring.org to get a list of the natural springs in your area. And I would also just look around for them yourself too. And as well, we would need to form ethics committees in order to deal with the biodigital convergence. We properly educate people about what is going on, and we present the information professionally, and we make sure that everybody can understand it. And once people are all on board and because I don't think anybody wants to become cybernetic, then once we present the information in a clear and concise manner, people won't want this, and they'll start to see those steps taking place in various avenues, because all industries, like I said, are involved in that idea, not just government and military, but also people apparently protesting against, the government and that kind of a thing as well. So all narratives are always controlled in history, but we can still do something about this. It's not too late. And I just want to reiterate that these fake native groups as well are all for this convergence, just like Kelly Anne Wolfe, who is a member of ASMIN. So thanks everybody for watching. Feel free to reach out to me here or reach out to me on Facebook at Matt Unseated. So thanks everybody for watching, and take care.